You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 54. Today, I speak with wife, mother, blogger, podcaster, and recovery mentor for wives of alcoholics, Julie Sanford, on how God turned her broken marriage into a message of hope for others. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. It's that time of year again. The third annual virtual grief symposium, The Art of Coping, is this week. We want to give a big thanks to our sponsor, Guardian Lane. Guardian Lane is a fun and interactive online grief resource for children and preteens. Guardian Lane works with the best grief counselors across the country to produce exclusive video projects your children and family can access on demand the second grief hits. Through fun projects and a community to share with, children learn to identify and express their feelings, helping them to begin a healthy grief journey. Visit guardianlane.com to start the fun today. Hello, Julie. How are you? Welcome to Faith Breathe Hope.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
I'm glad that you're here. So the first thing I want you to do is just warm up the audience a little bit and tell them something interesting about you.
So it would probably have to be that I am completely in love with all things from the 1940s. I know that's like a really weird time frame. I was not born in the 40s. Obviously, I did not grow up then, but I just love the music. I love the clothes, the home decor. Like I'm slowly trying to transition my home to incorporate like a lot more vintage and retro stuff. So my family thinks I'm crazy sometimes, but I just love it. It just really speaks to me for whatever reason.
I love that. That is so neat. And I ask that question with everybody this season that comes on, and you never know what you're going to get. And that is certainly one of the more interesting ones. I like it.
Oh, good. Well, thank you.
So today we are here to talk about how the Lord turned a broken marriage around. And I want you to start by getting into your story just a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Julie. I'm the mom of three. I have two grown daughters and a little boy who's 9. So started all over when he was born. I will be married this fall for 13 years. And as it relates to what we're going to be talking about today, I am also a recovery mentor for wives of alcoholics, which is kind of what my story is about. So a few years back, my husband and I had always been social drinkers, like a lot of people are. Didn't really see any reason to be worried or alarmed until a few years back when he lost his dad. And at that point, everything just took a turn for the worse. At first, I just noticed that the frequency was increasing and the amount was increasing. So I just remember one of the first things that I did was I hopped on Google and I started Googling like, how do I know if my husband's drinking too much, or how much drinking is too much in a day, a week, whatever. And I was getting kind of like some conflicting information where that was concerned. Some people were saying less was concerning. Some people were saying more, but it got to the point after, a few weeks into a few months where there was no doubt that there was an issue. Before he went to treatment, it had been a couple of years that we had been in a really bad place. Himself, obviously myself, the entire family was affected by it. By the end of the whole thing, before he ended up in recovery, he had tried to take his life twice. He was no longer working, and he was just deep in addiction. So clearly that was one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing I've ever been through. And at that time, I really just thought that it was literally going to be the death of my husband. and be the death of me, like spirit wise, emotionally, mentally. My kids were having some struggles, and I never would have thought that I would be sitting here talking to you about how this has all come around and been restored because of how dark it was for us back then.
Mhm. Yeah. This podcast was founded because of the passing of a loved one, and I always find it very interesting to hear about how different people deal with grief. Everybody is different, and everybody goes through things. But certainly, alcohol is one of those things that will be used, or can be used, or has been used as a comfort for loss. Not just the death of a loved one, but so many different things. And it can get out of control. So I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing that. I know that was it had to have been a hard place for you guys. When he was going through this as his helper in life, you said that you did some research. Was there any kind of a turnaround point where you kind of were like, hey, I need to approach him? And if that was the case, how did you go about that? Were you afraid to say anything? Are you willing to share these things with us?
Yeah, of course. So the way that it looked at first was just a lot of yelling, fighting, getting angry, ultimatums, threatening, like all of those things that I know now are the absolute opposite of the best way to handle this if your spouse is in a similar situation. But at the time, it's a gut reaction. It's a knee-jerk reaction. It's a panic-stricken reaction because things are falling apart around you and you don't know what to do. So you definitely feel like your first inclination is, okay, well, I got to figure out how to fix this. I've got to figure out how to stop this. And so coming at it from that point of view, a lot of times the very first thing that you do are those kind of like attack mode, I call it. Basically, you're just trying to attack the problem, attack the addiction, sometimes attack your husband because you see him as being the enemy in a lot of ways. And so for far too long, I approached things like that myself, trying to fix it, trying to figure it out, trying to kind of control him and get him to stop that way without realizing that if he had, gone to treatment solely for me or solely because of any ultimatum or threat, he wouldn't be going for himself and it probably would not have been successful. So fast forward a couple of years of trying all of it the wrong way. And I pretty much just ended up coming to the end of myself and finally realizing that it wasn't going to be anything that I did or I said or I mandated that was going to change the situation. And when I finally figured that out, I feel like that was kind of the turning point.
All right. I assume that well, I mean, not just in that situation, but so many things in life where we come to this place where we feel desperation. Like you said, you just want to kind of force it into being fixed. And
Right.
with addiction, it really has to be that person's choice. You can't force the addicted person into wanting help or going through the steps to accept it or work through it.
Exactly.
Now, when you were able to find this place where he accepted, I'm assuming he has accepted it and made it a choice, correct?
Yes, he did. It was not something that he was excited about, obviously,
Right.
because at that point, addiction had become the norm for him and it was his coping mechanism. And we
Mhm.
ended up finding out once he entered recovery, which he entered into a dual diagnosis facility. So they addressed the addiction and also mental health, underlying mental health issues. And we found out at that point that he had bipolar disorder. So he had always said to me, there's something else wrong. There's something else going on, which is I feel like the reason why I'm drinking, because my head doesn't feel right unless I'm
Mhm.
drinking. So I think that he was definitely wanting to get help um,
Mhm.
as a whole, but the prospect of giving up his, what he had become accustomed to, his medication and his way of coping with things was very scary. So he did finally go, but it wasn't, a situation where he was super excited about it. It was definitely scary for all of us.
I'm sure. And you know that when he did go, that's a big step in and of itself, but it doesn't end there. You have to be that support for him. So how difficult was that? What was there like a sigh of relief when saying, oh, okay, hey, we've hit this first hurdle, we're going up rather than continuing to plateau, or was it still really, really scary? Were you afraid that maybe it wouldn't work? How did that look?
Yes, very much so. I was very, very cautiously optimistic. I
Mhm.
almost was afraid to be hopeful because you hear so often about relapse and all of those things, or somebody does great in treatment and then they come back home in their natural environment and it's a whole different scenario and they're unable to maintain their sobriety. So I was very hopeful because he had taken that step, like you said, which he had not done before. And he did go inpatient, which made me feel a lot better because he was going to be somewhere where he didn't have the option to drink. So I knew that he was being fully immersed in recovery, which I thought was
Mhm.
really important. But yeah, there was a lot of apprehension because
Mhm.
A, I didn't know if he was going to make it through. And B, I didn't know if once we got home, if it was just going to be, the switch would flip and turn back
Mhm.
to what we were dealing with before. So fortunately, the biggest thing for me, I think that was the most helpful, is they had a family week at his recovery center where
Mhm.
they brought the family in each day for 5 days and taught us a lot of the things that they were teaching the
Mhm.
the addicts who were there, which was really, really helpful because I had zero idea about what addiction was really like because
Mhm.
I had never dealt with it firsthand before. And pretty much all of the things that I thought about it were wrong. And hearing all of the different things that they were telling them and then giving us some coping mechanisms and some ways that we could truly support them
Mhm.
was super helpful because that made me feel like I was empowered too,
Mhm.
instead of just they sent him home and I just kind of sat there with my fingers crossed, hoping that he
Mhm.
wouldn't, start
Right.
drinking again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important that you have those tools to be able to help as his support system, and I'm sure you know that it's not a short time thing. It's a long time thing. So you can't just
Yep.
expect somebody to get better, and they're all good. Like you said, you didn't know what's going to happen when he came home, because inpatient, as difficult as it is, I'm assuming could be a lot easier than that transition from being in a
Right.
safe space with counselors and therapists and more controlled environment, to coming home where you don't have any of that and you're back to where the circumstances occurred in the beginning that led
Right.
to the addiction. So how did that support look moving forward, as far as this is a Christian podcast and we talk about how God is in the middle of all of our wilderness, all of our storms, all of our circumstances. um, we go through a lot of things, like you mentioned earlier, is a lot of darkness. And so
Yes.
how is it, I guess I want to ask, how is it that you can hold on to God's promise of hope through that darkness? Because like you said, it was kind of maybe a little unstable, and
Mhm.
you weren't really sure if it was going to work out. You said you were cautiously optimistic, right? So where
Yeah,
does
very much
God
so.
fill in the blanks there, or on the pieces there?
So I grew up in church. I've been a Christian since I was a child, and my faith has never been more tested than it was through this period of time. I never thought that I would have ever been a person to have just completely doubted God's existence. But at the end of the really difficult period, I did, because I didn't understand why a loving God and a Christian family was having to go through this. Like, why wasn't he showing up for us? Why wasn't he delivering my husband from his addiction? Why were we continuing to have to go through this daily torment for, days upon weeks upon months and then years? And it just seemed like it was never ending. And I really didn't understand why I felt like I had just been dropped off and left to fend for myself. And one of the things when I came to the end of myself, that was definitely like a spiritual experience and kind of a spiritual awakening, because I basically got to where I just was in the shower one day, like blazing hot water pouring down on me. I had so much anger. I've never been more angry in my life. And I just started screaming at God, like just angry screaming, help us. Like, just, you need to show up now. I'm done waiting. We're falling apart. He could die. Like, you need to show up immediately. And it wasn't too long after that when my husband did agree to go to treatment. And I think that a part of it was that he was waiting for me to get out of the way, because my voice in my husband's ear was so loud.
Mhm.
And, there was so much anger and fighting and just division in the house, that if God had been trying to work in his life and speak to his heart, a lot of times I don't think he would have even been able to hear it, because there was so much turmoil in our relationship. And I was trying so hard to play God and fix everything.
Mhm.
And so when I was going through all of it, I really thought and felt that I had been abandoned. But now that I look back at it, and my husband's been sober for 4 years now, our marriage has been completely restored. Now I have this platform to help other wives of alcoholics, which I never in a million years thought that I would ever do. Now I can see his hand all over it. But it didn't happen until I was on the other side. And the ways that I grew and changed because of that are monumental. And those changes and that growth I carry into every aspect of my life now. So
Mhm.
it actually helped me in a lot of ways, which I never would have thought that it would have. And the other piece of it now is, when we go through stuff now as a family or even as individuals, it's like, this is nothing. It's really perspective. We think to ourselves, if we can get through that, like this is nothing. So
Yeah.
he was all over it. His hand was all over it. He was working in ways that I just didn't realize at the time, but can very
Mhm.
clearly see now.
Mhm. And I think, and I think as Christians that a lot of times, and I've discussed this with other guests on the podcast too, that a lot of times we think since we love God and we have a good relationship with the Lord, that our lives are going to be a little bit more easy, a little
Mhm.
easier, a little bit more coasting, to
Right.
where we say, oh, God's got us, He protects us. We're not going to have to go through the really, really hard things. But I realize, and I've seen a lot of Christians having to go through very difficult situations. I have an opinion about that, where I believe that as Christians, our hearts are strong, or, we have that will for that relationship with our Heavenly Father. And so when we go through things, he allows us to use it as a testimony for his kingdom. And as you noted earlier, so that we can be of service to his kingdom. We certainly have gone through things in our lives here at our house. And that's why you're actually here talking to me. And most people that I do interview have gone through similar things where they're able to serve through what they've gone through. It's not pretty while you're going through it. Like you said, it's very dark and we don't want it. It's painful. But, if you can, like you had also mentioned, step out of the way. I also think that as humans, maybe not necessarily Christians, as humans, we really try hard to fix things. We say, hey, God, here it is. This is awful. This is bothering me. It's a lot of pain. But I need you to do something with it. And then he doesn't do anything right away, or we don't think we hear him right away, even though he's there. And instead of giving him a chance and really stepping down and letting him work, we start looking, what can we do? What can we do? How can we fix it? What can I do? I have to be doing something, because if I'm not doing something, then it's not going to get fixed. And what I find is very interesting, I listened to a podcast today, and what the podcaster said is that when we do stuff like that, we are questioning the integrity of our Heavenly Father. And
Mhm.
it's saying, hey, you know what? I need you to do this. I know you can do it, but I'm not really sure. I'm going to try to help you out.
Right. Exactly.
um, so when he came home and you were able to, continue to work through this, you said he's been sober for 4 years.
Mhm.
When did you start thinking, hey, I'm going to use this? Or was it just something that gradually happened? Or is it something that you said, hey, I'm going to start reaching out to other people who've been through this? How did that happen? And what are you doing?
So I was a very unwilling participant. I
Okay,
did
got
not
it.
I did not want to speak about this. I didn't want anything to do with this. Like you said, this was such a dark period and such a hard thing to talk about. It's not a pretty subject. It's something that it's hard to relive, what we went through. And for a really long time, I felt like God was kind of impressing upon me that I needed to share my story. So I was doing something completely different at the time. And I remember just putting like a blog post or something up, just one random one-off blog post, and thinking to myself, okay, that's it. I shared my story, and, moved on back over here to what I was doing. And it just kept coming up and coming up and coming up to where basically it was just a chain of events to where I could no longer hide from it. And I needed to just realize that nothing else that I was trying was ever going to move forward, because it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. So I finally decided, okay, I need to stop ignoring the elephant in the room. And one thing that I got from God that was really, really like a game changer for me was he basically said that he didn't bring us through this with a story of hope for it to not be shared with anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that I needed to be for someone else now who I needed back then,
Mm-hmm.
because I needed me when I was there. I needed to hear the person who had the story of hope and the story of restoration. And I couldn't find that. There was a few different people that I tried to follow, and that had different offerings, but there was nobody that I could find that was faith-based, that that God was a big part of the journey, and that was still with their husband, their addicted husband. And so I realized, okay, well, like it or not, it's my job to fill that space. And I feel like almost that space was being held for me, because when I think about it, it's really kind of strange that there isn't somebody else who is already speaking to Christian women specifically, who have that story of, like I said, restoration, and everything is beautiful now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of just had to get over myself, really, to be quite honest, and just decide that, I was brought through this for a reason, and it is very, very selfish of me to not now help other people who desperately need help, just like I did, and to not move forward with where he's trying to take me, where that's concerned.
My question in this is, when you first came to that realization, or somebody, you first had this thought of, hey, I need to be that person that helps. How did that make you feel? Were you kind of still bucking it? And the reason that I ask is because when our daughter first passed away, somebody told me, they said, maybe you're supposed to help other people. And as the grieving person, as a person who was in pain, I didn't want to help anybody. It's not that I didn't want to help people. I love people. I didn't want to help them having to go through that pain.
Right.
If that makes sense. So how did that work for you? Was it something that you were just, okay, God, I'm going to obey, or was I don't want to?
No, it took a long time. I mean, I just pivoted to doing this at the beginning of this year. And prior to that, I was doing something else in the online space for 5 years prior. And this happened, 5, 6 years ago, when he was really going through the addiction. And so it took a while because I didn't want to. It wasn't that I didn't want to help people, like you said, but it's hard and it's heavy. And so even now, and I'm a very empathetic person, which I think makes me good at what I do, but it also means that I absorb emotions from other people a lot of the time. So like the ladies in my membership and the ladies who I talk to, I'm not just hearing their story and hearing their struggles, like I'm feeling it. And I knew that I was going to experience some of that when I move forward into this. And it's not comfortable sometimes. It still feels very heavy and difficult sometimes, but I know that God is right there with me, and he has brought me to this place for a reason. And when I remember that, and when I remember why I'm doing this and that they need it, it makes that burden a lot lighter, because I understand that just the fact that I have that connection to them is helping them move past some of the heavy stuff that they're feeling and that they're going through. So that definitely helps. But no, I was not all about it at first. Not in any way,
Right.
shape, or
Yeah,
form.
I get it. So I have to ask this. So being that this can be heavy emotionally, because you are that empathetic person and you absorb their feelings, not just, the stories that they tell you. what does that time of rest look like for you, self-care? Because that is so important for people who are in a space where they help other people and they serve, to not only serve constantly, which, you say God wants you to do this, which is really admirable, but you have to take care of yourself so that you can be
Right.
good for others. And that's a thing that I believe a lot of Christian women, maybe all women, maybe men too, struggle with, where they come to this space where I have to do, and it's very heavy, and that makes me very tired, very exhausted mentally and emotionally. But there has to be that period of restoration again, and self-care. So how do you deal with that?
For me, I have a non-negotiable time in the morning that I am by myself and that I open my Bible, devotions, praying, sometimes like an app on my phone, a Christian book, whatever it is. I take that time in the morning to fill my spirit, because
Okay.
if I don't, I feel like I'm already starting the day depleted.
Mhm.
And every single morning, whether I'm feeling like, yeah, I'm ready to take on the world, or whether I am having one of those days where I just feel like, I don't know if I can do this today, there's
Mhm.
something that he gives me that is so specific to what I need to hear or see right then. And
Mhm.
it always is just like filling your gas tank, and I always come away from that and just feel like, okay, I mean, I may not go from feeling like I absolutely can't do this to I'm ready to take on the world, but I definitely feel capable and feel
Mhm.
like, refreshed, which can go a really long way when you do that before you start your day. So that is my non-negotiable, like Sunday through Saturday, it's my time. And I usually strive for between like 30 minutes to an hour. Sometimes I only get 5-10 minutes, but I make sure I do it, because
Mhm.
without it, so, there's been a few times where I've skipped it by accident because I've just woken up and things have been kind of chaotic. And right around like, noon, 1, I'm thinking, why am I like having such a hard time today? I'm so grumpy and my fuse is short and I just can't deal with anything. And then I'm like, oh, that's right, I didn't have my time this morning. So it's best for me and everyone around me if I get my time. So that
Yeah.
really is like the most important thing, I think.
You can see by the smile on my face and the nodding, I completely agree. I have a similar routine that doesn't always get done. But when it is not done, I can definitely tell it for sure.
Hmm.
And then I know, hey, it's because I haven't spent that time with the Lord. I haven't read my Bible. I haven't prayed. I haven't written in my prayer journal, whatever that thing may be. Um, so I'd like to know, if you wouldn't mind, tell me, how is the relationship with your husband and the Lord changed since he was able to go into rehab and then come out, and since he has been really trying to deal with the addiction and moving forward on that.
So he went to a Christian facility, which was great, and that was something that we were looking for, because I feel like it is a big part of recovery. It's there's kind of these schools of thought, I think, for people who are kind of outside of the addiction world, that if you are a person of faith and you have succumbed to addiction, that if you just pray hard enough, you can be completely healed and restored. And that is not the case, I think, a lot of the time, because especially in a situation with his, where there was addiction, there was also mental illness that needed to be medically treated, things like that. I think that it's such a huge part of it, but that is a little bit of a misconception, that he could have just like stayed home and prayed a lot. That may have worked for some people, and I'm not knocking it by any means. I mean, I think prayer is phenomenally important and impactful, and it works. But
Mhm.
there are a lot of other layers to this sometimes. So that was important that he was in a Christian facility, because they also were teaching them not only how to deal with the practical things of life, but also the spiritual realm of it, and how to lean on that and to use that to your advantage as well. So I know that that's something that he has called for a lot, or called on a lot. And I also know that he's told me many times that, especially since he tried to take his life a couple of times, like he knows that he's here for a reason. And
Mhm.
he knows that he was kept here for a reason. And so my hope is, and he seems to be relatively on board, that at some point in the future we will kind of be a husband and wife team. So I can speak to the spouse and he can speak to the addict, because
Oh,
it is kind
yeah.
of like this dance you have to do, because
Mhm.
you're so entwined in each other's lives, and there's so much understanding that needs to happen on both sides. I think a lot of times the wife really doesn't know what the husband's going through, but the husband doesn't always really know what the wife is going through, and the ways that it affects her that he may not even be realizing. So
Mhm.
my hope is, and my thought is, that at some point we're going to be doing this together, and that it could even be that much more impactful.
Definitely. That sounds amazing. Uh, so encouragement for the wives. So if there's a wife out there right now that, she's suffering in secret and she hasn't told anybody, maybe people are picking up on some things. They can tell she's not enjoying life. There's something going on, but she doesn't know where to turn. What kind of words can you give her of encouragement?
That was me for a really long time. You just described me. In fact, I kept pretty much everyone in the dark about what was going on. They knew that something was going on. They did not have any idea what the full scope of it was until my husband's first suicide attempt, which he went missing for over 24 hours. And so obviously the whole family was involved at that point, because it was, the police were involved. Like it was a pretty big deal. Um, but I was there, and I felt like I could handle it. And I didn't want anyone to know, because there was shame and guilt and
Mhm.
embarrassment. And so the first thing I will say is, you have to get help for yourself.
Mhm.
I did a really terrible job of that. I ended up covered in stress induced hives for months on end, because I was under such immense stress and didn't have any support, really, by my own choosing at the time. But
Mhm.
it's just really super important that they realize that they're going through trauma.
Mhm.
And it's not just your husband that needs help right now. Like, you have got to get some help for yourself. And then the second part of it, which is even bigger, is, if you do feel like God has left you, I want you to know that He hasn't. He may seem super quiet, super distant. You may not even be able to see Him from where you are, but He is there. And like I said, looking back now, I see so many places where He was there, but I was so overshadowed by so much anxiety and overwhelm at the time that I couldn't see it then. But I
Mhm.
promise you, He is there, and He's waiting for you to acknowledge His presence
Mhm.
and let Him help you bear this burden, because it's so much easier to go through when you do it with Him.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you are stating, hey, it is your spouse's, your husband's addiction. However, you need to address what's going on with you and have support for you as well. Because I believe that in any type of situation, maybe not just the alcohol piece, but when you have a spouse that's going through something and you talk about that shame that comes up, it's embarrassing to let people know that you don't have it all together, period, much less all together in your marriage, when other people are all over social media talking about how it's, they have the best spouse ever. And, and, it can be a lot of shame there, but knowing that you need to be able to have somebody to confide in, to be able to have that support as well. And I love that you say that. I'm going to ask you one other question. And I know we're not talking about children right now, but you did mention that, you had children that you had to kind of work with as well.
Right.
Um, if you were speaking to that child, it could be a teenager, it could be an adult child, it could be just a kid who's old enough to realize that something's not right in the home.
Mhm.
And you may have different advice, different encouragement for each of those age groups, but do you have any kind of encouragement for the child who says, hey, I don't know what's going on with my parents, or I do know what's going on with my parents, and I'm not sure where I fit in all of this?
Mhm.
And it's really, even though it's their addiction, even though it's their marriage, it's really affecting me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do, in my programs, I do stress the importance of boundaries when there are children in the home, because there is some protection that needs to happen there. But when we were going through this, we still have two kids here at home. My daughter was around 20, and my son was really small. He was like 4 or 5. And so he My son was kind of too little to really understand what was happening, I think, for the most part. He did know that there were some things that were off, though. So the way that I would explain it to him, because I didn't want for him to be scared, is that I told him that daddy was sick and we were trying to figure out what was wrong with him and we were trying to get him some help. And he was pretty satisfied with just that answer because he was really small. He did eventually, the way that they told us when we were in the recovery center was a good way to phrase it for really little kids, is basically you equate it to an allergy. So daddy doesn't drink anymore because he has what's kind of like an allergy to alcohol. It doesn't have the same effect on him that it has on other people, and so he has to stay away from it. So there are, I mean, it depends on the circumstance, but there are some ways to handle that. With my daughter, she was quite a bit older. She was an adult essentially, and I just was reminding her that he kept telling us that something else was wrong. And she had heard him say that a lot too. And we would kind of go between being angry and frustrated at him and just having this deep just empathy for him, and just because we knew he was struggling and we were seeing him struggling so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so she knew that she saw that firsthand. My older daughter, who did not live in the home, had a lot more anger because she wasn't seeing a lot of the things where he was just really struggling and suffering, and it was harder for her, I think, because she didn't have that front row seat, which was probably better in a lot of regards. But my daughter, who was here, she saw that he very clearly did need help. And so I think that that went a long way with her because we love him. I mean, he's a great person. He's a loving dad and like a devoted husband. And he was just pulled under by addiction. That doesn't mean that he's a bad person. So I think that she clung to that a lot too. So it does depend on what age they are and what you think they're ready to um, to have shared with them.
Yeah.
But it is important, I think, also for them to understand what addiction is, and that it's not really just like a flat choice like a lot of people think that it is. I think a lot of times there are underlying things that really do make it literally impossible for that person to just say,
Mhm.
I'm going to stop tomorrow. So you really kind of just have to play it by ear depending on the situation and the age of the child and things like that. But I would say, if they are expressing concern and you can tell that it is bothering them, there definitely needs to be some boundaries and some conversation, just so that they don't wonder like, what the heck is happening? Why isn't anybody
Right.
talking about this kind of
Right.
thing?
Yeah. I love the way that you brought up we love him. I think that's so important to just remember, hey, this thing that's going on is not, it doesn't define that person. That's still daddy. That's
Exactly.
still my husband. That's still the person that I love. We just have to work on some things. It's not the definition of who they are. It's just something that they're going through. And just remembering that love is, I think, very, very important. I like that.
Yeah.
So, Julie, will you please tell everybody where they can find you? I'm sure there's somebody out there that may even need what you've got going on.
Of course. So I am married to addiction everywhere. So I have a podcast called Married to Addiction. That's my web address, marriedtoaddiction.com. Also the handle that I go by on social media. I have a couple of options right now that I'm offering for wives of alcoholics. I do have a 30-day online program that is kind of like more of a self-study thing for somebody who just wants to kind of take the information and try to implement it on their own. And then I have my membership where I work a lot more closely with the ladies. There's a group component to that, and we kind of work on step by step how through this. And when they come in, they kind of have an assessment of sorts where they figure out kind of where they are on the path between being completely just overwhelmed by the addiction and feeling life is unmanageable, and feeling like life is manageable, and they have a plan on how to move forward and keep themselves protected in the process. And I don't just mean physical protection, because I
Yeah.
don't actually work with women who are in abusive relationships, but we have to keep ourselves mentally, emotionally, spiritually protected as well. So
Mhm.
there are a lot of ways that you can do that can really change how difficult or easy this journey is. So that's kind of what the membership is for, to just kind of walk them through that. So if it does resonate with anybody here, or if they know somebody who might be going through this, I would be honored to help in any way that I can.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope.
Thank
For
you.
those of you listening, continue to be blessed and bless others, and we'll see you next time. And I'd like to give a special thank you to the third annual Virtual Grief Symposium sponsor, GuardianLane.com. If you haven't received your tickets yet, go to griefsymposium.com and get them today. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.